All right, this goes out to all the runners out there. All right. You're with me on this one. I ran my first marathon at the age of 26. I ran my second marathon at the age of 27. And by the time I turned 33, I had run so many marathons, half marathons, 10-milers, and other races, I had completely lost track. I had spent most of my late 20s and early 30s racing and training and racing, and not doing very much else. I was 33, I was single, I had no social life, and I hadn't been on a date in years. I woke up one morning, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and said, "So you can run real far, real fast. So what? Maybe it's time to try something new." That something new was a DC socialite named Elizabeth. She had the face of Grace Kelly, the body of Mae West, and the barbed wire wit of Dorothy Parker. And she had this amazingly jam-packed social calendar that she wanted me to be part of. "Pierce, would you like to go to the opening of Jose Andres' newest restaurant? Pierce, would you like to be my date to the White House Correspondents' Dinner? Pierce, would you like to accompany me to a wedding in the Hamptons?" Yes, yes, and yes. I took to Elizabeth's amazing social life like I had taken to running years earlier. And our first year together was a nonstop party. I went from living the life of a marathon running monk to starring in my own edition of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I was loving it. And even though I had scaled back on the running, I still continued to crush the races that I did run. And when she wasn't hungover or didn't have brunch plans, Elizabeth would come out and support me. She would make these signs that she would bring to the races I ran. Now, signs are a common occurrence at most road races, but her signs were a little different. They were a little on the snarky side. "Who dressed you this morning?" read one sign. "You're almost halfway there," read another. And her all-time classic, the inspirational, "Don't crap your pants." As our relationship entered its second year, it was growing increasingly apparent to me that Elizabeth did not share my love or passion for running. "I do not share your love or passion of running," she said. "I am not your girlfriend. No. Running is your girlfriend. And do you know how exhausting that is for me? It's so selfish." I hated being called selfish. I could do this. I can be a runner and also be the boyfriend of a very, very demanding socialite. And I was going to prove it. Now, as a rule, I run the Cherry Blossom 10-miler every year. It's one of my favorite races. And in this particular year, it just so happened to fall on the exact same weekend as her best friend's birthday blowout. Now, not going to that birthday party was not an option for me, but what I failed to take into account was that the birthday party was actually an all-day affair that started with brunch, evolved into a backyard barbecue, and turned into a late-night rager at the Toledo Lounge in Adams Morgan, complete with grilled cheese sandwiches and onion rings on top of more and more and more beers. Now, you don't have to be an endurance athlete to know that consuming grilled cheese sandwiches and onion rings on top of 12 beers with some brunch and some barbecue thrown in for good measure is a horrible, horrible food decision to make the day before a race. And as the evening wore on, I kept looking at my watch, counting down the hours to the start of the race the next morning. And Elizabeth snapped at me, saying, "Stop looking at your watch. You're ruining my night." Truthfully, I don't know how I made it home that night. I don't know what time I went to bed, and quite frankly, how I actually got to the race that morning. Still a little fuzzy. But when that gun sounded and my running shoes started hitting the pavement, I was jarred uneasily awake. And all those evils I had consumed in the past 24 hours started sloshing around my weary innards. By the time I hit mile 2, it was painstakingly apparent that I would have been better served camping out in a porta-john before the start of the race. Mile 3, my large intestine reached full capacity. And as I approached mile 4, there, in plain view of the majestic Lincoln Memorial, I began to lose control of my colon. And as I began to speed up in desperate search of a porta-john along the course, my sphincter began to assert its own independence. With no porta-john in sight, I made a decision to take a detour off the course as the eyes of spectators followed me. I desperately searched for a spot where I could find some modicum of privacy and dignity to relieve my bowels, but time was not on my side. I fumbled with the knot in my running shorts, and there, under the watchful eye of the great emancipator, I built my own monument on the National Mall. Now, while I had done a pretty good job shading myself from the watchful eyes of the spectators watching the race, what I had failed to take into account at that moment in time was the steady stream of tourists behind me on their way to see the cherry blossoms. And as I was in mid-squat, looking over my shoulder, I saw the horrified faces of mothers covering the eyes of their children. Grown men pointing and laughing. And a veritable United Nations of foreign tourists snapping away with their cameras. Now, for those of you here tonight who have not taken an ill-timed shit on the National Mall, let me tell you, toilet paper does not grow on trees. So I was forced to make do with the sweat-soaked bandana that, up until that moment, had been covering my head. And when I finished, I gently laid it over the steaming pile, like I was saying farewell to an army buddy. I pulled up my shorts and I made my way back onto the course. As I approached mile 5, just before the turnaround spot, I saw her there, Elizabeth. She was holding up her "You're almost halfway there" sign. I stopped. I walked up to her. I took her hands in my face. I stroked her cheek. And then I ran my fingers through her luscious blonde hair. I kissed her, I stared her in the eye, and I said, "I love you, baby, but I can't do this anymore." Nah, that's what I wanted to do. But I was running a really fast race, despite the shit at mile 4. I finished that day around 1:07, which isn't bad, again, considering I was ridiculously hungover and had taken the crap the size of a small newborn on the National Mall. After that race, I started taking my running a little bit more seriously again. My relationship with Elizabeth, less so, and we didn't last very much longer after that. The way I see it, life is way too short to spend it with someone who treats you like shit because you're passionate about something, anything other than them. So, word of advice to anyone out here tonight is in a similar-ish situation. Just 2 words. Run away. Thanks, everybody.